Yes, we have been monitoring the situation out of Minneapolis. And today, Minneapolis public schools canceled classes for the remainder of the week due to safety concerns and out of an abundance of caution. Protests broke out overnight after an immigration and customs enforcement agent shot and killed a woman on Wednesday. Federal and local officials are arguing over what exactly happened. President Trump and other members of his administration characterized the ICE agents' actions as an act of self-defense. However, state, local leaders, and eyewitnesses are casting doubt on that account and call for a full and fair investigation.
So joining us now to discuss this shooting incident in Minneapolis from the campus of Rice University, the executive director of the Claudio X. Gonzalez Center for the U.S. Mexico, for the study of U.S. and Mexico at the Baker Institute of Public Policy, Tony Payan. First of all, Tony, with a title like that, I need to look at your business card someday, but it's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Yes, Tony, you were on Hello Houston 6 months ago, and we were discussing specifically the expansion of ICE through the One Big Beautiful Bill. And you outlined and detailed the dangers of the rapid increase of law enforcement at a very quick rate. Here we are today seeing a situation where we're not sure exactly what happened, and we're watching this and we're looking at this very closely. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, the academic bibliography has been very clear for a very long time. Political scientists have followed the growth and the expansion of law enforcement agencies in particular, the government in general, but I think law enforcement agencies in particular. When you recruit very fast, very quickly, and do not train agents in the right protocols, the right way to deal with the public, the right ways to de-escalate an issue in the streets, when they don't follow the rules and regulations that many law enforcement agencies have put in place to avoid just this kind of incident. Of course, mistakes are going to be made, and these are fatal mistakes. This woman, Miss Good, was killed in Minnesota, and we've seen these incidents by ICE. We saw how they unleashed a dog on another immigrant in the Washington, D.C. area. We've seen them shoot at a father who's dropping a kid at school in Chicago. So they're making all kinds of mistakes. Of course, this is part of the spectacle. It's part of the Trump administration's way of enforcing immigration, is a turbocharged deportation-only immigration policy. And they're recruiting very fast, $50,000 bonuses for these guys to sign up with very little vetting on who these people are, what they believe, and what they're doing in the streets. And the president's still defending these guys and what happened in Minneapolis. So this should have been expected, should have been seen, and it's a consequence of what we have established for a very long time in the literature.
But it's interesting, Tony, because I think what makes this very unique is something that you were discussing, 6 months ago, and the concern that you had was around foreign-born citizens, or, looking at this from, there's concern around racial profiling, immigrant communities. But we know the woman who was fatally shot was named Renee Nicole Good. She was a U.S. citizen. She was 37 years old. She's a mother of three and described by her family as a poet, a writer, a wife, a mom. She had just recently moved to Minneapolis. She had previously lived in Colorado and Kansas City. So I guess my question becomes, is she's not necessarily, to me, fitting the profile of somebody that ICE would want to detain or stop or profile.
I think one of the problems that we see is that ICE is employing racial profiling.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the people that they're stopping, whether it's in New Orleans or whether it's in Houston itself, we've had some raids in Houston, or whether it's in Minneapolis or Los Angeles or New York and on, are really people of color, brown and black people. That's where they focus. But evidently, there's a lot of resistance to the Trump administration and to these very draconian immigration law enforcement. And people are going to protest, and that will include people who are Black Americans, citizens, of course, and this is going to include, of course, a lot of European descendants, Americans, white Americans, I guess, and they're going to be in the way, and they're going to be protesting. And I think if the ICE agents are not ready to de-escalate, This is what is going to happen. It's not the first time. And by the way, we've seen that they have detained people who are U.S. citizens who have tried to prove that they are U.S. citizens to them, and yet nonetheless they cart them off to a detention center, and then days later they release them with an apology, and that includes all kinds of people. So they ought to know that there are going to be people who resist these actions, and they ought to know what to do with them. I think the difference here is with this particular woman in Minneapolis is that exactly what you said. She is a white woman, and she's a mother, and she has absolutely no record. And it appears from the videos that I watched online that she was actually trying to get away. And so there was a violation of the ICE protocol itself not to shoot on people who are getting away from you. And so there's going to be a lot of backlash. I think this may be an important turning point for ICE that is coming under increasing scrutiny.
But Tony, in this case, we're talking about someone who is driving a vehicle, a driver of a car. It is possible the windows were tinted. There are all sorts of possibilities. We don't know whether this ICE agent could tell what color this woman was if she was a woman. It's possible this ICE agent saw only a vehicle driving toward him or her. I don't know which it was we're talking about here. So really the question becomes, is it a legitimate defense? And I understand that law enforcement is not your specific field of expertise, but is it a legitimate defense for this officer, for this agent, I beg your pardon, to say, I was in fear of my life, and so I fired my weapon?
There's a couple of things that I think take us away from that hypothesis. The very first is that this woman was across the road, and then there was an ICE truck or an ICE van coming towards her, and she waved them through. So that particular gray vehicle went in front of her and passed her. And then another truck came right up against her. The agent came out of the truck and walked right up to her. There was another agent right there standing by and then of course they came right up to her and they said, get out of the car. And of course you can see the wheels turning. First, she backed off, and then the wheels are turning to the right, which means that woman was trying to move onto the road and away from the agents. The other agent that was in front of the car, not quite in front, but over angled to the left side of the vehicle, as the vehicle was turning right. Well, that agent should have known that the protocol was essentially to let the vehicle through. They're not supposed to, as per the protocol that they're trained to do, the ICE agents themselves, they're not supposed to fire on anybody in a vehicle that's turning to move away from them. That was very clear. Evidently, this will have to be discussed in a court of law. The state of Minnesota is likely to move against this agent. The federal government is likely to come in his defense. We don't know where this is going to end up. A lot of this evidence will be viewed by a jury, I think, eventually, hopefully, in Minnesota, and then they will have to decide. But I've watched the videos quite a few times over and over from different angles. And I think the protocol dictated that that particular agent ought to move further to the left, let the car go. They're not supposed to shoot at somebody who's getting away from them, no matter who they are and what they're doing. And I think that is key. That is going to be key evidence in a potential trial in the future.
And this gets back to the point you made earlier about de-escalation, that perhaps an agent with more gray hairs who'd been around for a while would have known to simply step away. Interesting point. Now, if this had happened in the state of Texas, and if the driver had survived, I suspect she would have been charged with a crime such as attempted capital murder of a police officer, of something of that nature. But Kristi Noem, the director of Homeland Security, described it as an act of domestic terrorism. How do you define terrorism, and does this fit the definition of that word?
Well, terrorism is a very specific definition. It means that you are trying to use certain means, I guess, violence or car bombs or specific methods of violence to overthrow the system, to impede government work, and so on. This was not the case. I think it's very clear that the woman was moving away. Obviously, the Trump administration has turbocharged the deportation system. I think one of the problems that we're seeing is that this particular administration has no immigration policy other than deportation. That's exclusively their policy, and they're doing it in a way that creates a kind of a public political spectacle. Because you can do law enforcement in a way that you do investigations, you identify the individuals, you quickly move in. Look, our armed forces did an excellent job in Caracas at moving into the presidential palace and plucking out that guy. Sure, there were some people who were killed there that were protecting Maduro. They did it almost surgically. I think law enforcement has to be done that way, and they have to be trained to de-escalate. ICE agents are not doing that. They're moving around in communities, and I think they're trying to create a spectacle to intimidate, to push people away. We've seen them over and over gas people and throw tear gas at them and shove them on the floor and handcuff them and do all kinds of things like that. That is not the way law enforcement is supposed to do it. Almost anybody will be able to tell you that. So I think that this is specifically designed to be a very intimidating spectacle. And I think that's what is very, very concerning. And the administration is, of course, going to defend its policy. It's going to defend the agents that are acting that way by design, because I think this is the way they want it to look. Well, that's the consequence. And we'll see. I think we've seen it already, and we'll see many more incidents in the future.
It's interesting, Tony. We have discussed here on Hello Houston the long history and complexity of immigration policy right here in the United States. And we can all agree. I think that if a police officer pulls someone over, we stop. If a law enforcement who is clearly dressed as a police officer, as a border patrol agent, it is very obvious that they are the person. Even if you in charge or of the law, even if you walk into an airport, if somebody stops you listen. There are a lot of questions around ICE agent protocols and understanding how they're going into, and you've kind of touched on this, into communities with unmarked cars, wearing face masks, being completely covered. Do you think this is going to have a real ripple effect on how U.S. citizens will now approach and listen to perhaps Border Patrol agents or ICE agents? Because, I know myself, I think that if somebody questioned my citizenship, I would be like, excuse me? What right do you, that kind of situation. Can you talk to us a little bit about the history of, and the psychology, I guess, of how that's going to work and that dynamic?
Yes. Look, Celeste, I think you and I, of course, citizens of the United States, get stopped by the police and we are asked for our documents, usually, our ability to drive a vehicle and things
Driver's
like driver's
license.
license and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we comply, and then we probably get a ticket for speeding or whatever we're doing, right? But there is a compact, and there has been a compact for a very long time in the United States, that citizens stop when they are asked to be stopped, and they show proof of whatever documentation the policeman is asking for. There is a compact, and we're supposed to trust them. We're supposed to come to the police if we need to. If we witness a crime, we're supposed to report it. If we are victims of a crime, we're supposed to come and report that particular crime. We're supposed to aid the police in doing its job, its law enforcement. Here, I think we're kind of breaking that compact, because everybody's suspect. They don't begin with the idea that you are innocent until proven guilty or illegal, so to speak. You are immediately presumed to be illegally in the country and then harassed and harassed. And we've seen videos over and over again until you prove to them, and sometimes not even if you prove to them or tell them that you are a U.S. citizen, you're still carted off to a detention center and you're still harassed. So the trust is broken. I think a lot of these communities are going to be very suspicious. And Program 287G, which essentially deputizes local law enforcement as immigration officers, the federal government offers certain financial incentives to local police forces to aid in that. And if you get stopped, then you know that and you don't have the documentation with you, and you try to tell them that you don't have it, for example, the local law enforcement agent is going to call ICE and they're going to question you. So that compact is being broken. That is not supposed to be the way we do law enforcement in the United States. This is police that has really exceeded the way and the protocols, and really just due process, human rights, and all kinds of lines have been crossed here. And I think that compact is going to take a very long time to really be restored between us citizens and, of course, the police that we're supposed to trust and go to for protection.
You know, Tony, when you were discussing essentially the expansion of ICE again back in July, you used the term mission creep. Do you think this is an example of that, or is that off base?
No, it is mission creep. I mean, think about the Border Patrol. Obviously, the statute says clearly that the Border Patrol and immigration agents have a jurisdiction within 100 air miles from the U.S. borders. If you go around the border of the United States, that is a long way, almost to San Antonio in the case of Texas. And of course, it covers most of the blue cities and towns on the East Coast. Think about 100 miles and that a plane is supposed to fly from the coastline all the way into. So they have a lot of jurisdiction, but the Border Patrol in the past had actually been mostly focused on the border. Most of them, 95%, had been stationed on the U.S. Mexico border. That was their area of operations. And ICE was supposed to do very specific customs and immigration enforcement by a judge through following certain protocols, certain orders to deport within the U.S. territory. Now the Border Patrol is deployed all around in those cities. Most of them, a lot of them are blue cities, of course. So there is a sense that they're being harassed, that the citizens of those places are being harassed. So I think at the end of the day, if they are expanding. I mean, the border patrol I grew up in the El Paso area, and I can tell you we were accustomed to seeing the Border Patrol all over the place. Now you can see them in New York, you can see them in Washington D.C., you can see them in San Francisco, you can see them all over the place. So their agencies are by nature imperialistic. They're going to try to acquire more resources, more agents, more prestige, and of course more jurisdiction. And I think the Border Patrol is really out of it. They should really be focused on the Canadian and the Mexican border, and ICE ought to be doing more pinprick operations to deport individuals that are criminal. The president himself has said that that is the objective. This doesn't look like that is the objective. 95% of the individuals that they have caught and deported have no criminal record. Yes, they're in the United States without authorization, but they have no criminal record. So the stated policy is not in line with the operations in the streets. And I think that's a very serious problem.
You're listening to Hello Houston. We are speaking with Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, Tony Payan. If you would like to join the conversation, you can call 713-440-8870. Let's go to the phone lines. James from Conroe is on the line. James, welcome to Hello Houston. What is your comment or question for Tony Payan?
Okay, so I have a quick comment, and then I'll ask the question. I watched the videos. I watched the video in slow motion, etc. In my opinion, this was murder, absolutely cold-blooded murder. Now, if I have ICE agents pulling on my door, pulling out their weapons, telling me to get out of the car, I'm going to do the same thing the lady did. I'm not getting out of the car. I'm going to try to drive away and escape from them because they scare me. And so with that being said, with all the information that's out there, do you see this as murder or do you see this as law enforcement? And I'll hang up and listen.
Tony, what are your thoughts on what James just asked you?
Mm-hmm. I mean, obviously, the culpability of this particular action is going to have to be determined by a jury. Hopefully, we'll get there. We don't know. But the president said that the agent was injured and that he was attacked with a vehicle, that the vehicle was weaponized. That's not what I see in the in the videos that I've seen. I've seen them from different angles, different ways of looking at the evidence, the visual or the video evidence. That's not what I see. I think this is an agent. They're very hot-headed. You can see sometimes that the temperature rises and the emotions really just overflow, and the agents get very aggressive, and so do people. I mean, if you're being essentially attacked, or so you're in front of somebody who's very aggressive, emotions can get out of hand. And I think he didn't follow the protocol. It was evident that she was moving away. To me, it was evident that she was trying to get away, and that he just got incensed. And you can see him after the incident, of course, moving his hand like, let's move, let's get out of here, let's move, sort of like that. So he was not in the hospital. The president outright lied. He said that he was in the hospital when he's been attacked. Not at all. Afterwards, you can see him sort of waving his hand in the air and telling the other agents to sort of move on, move on. So, this was a guy who just, things got out of hand. I think his culpability will be determined in a court of law. Perhaps I think Minnesota will pursue charges against him. But I think it doesn't look good for him.
So Tony Payan with the Baker Institute at Rice University, there was a time when incidents like this would happen right here in Houston, incidents of police brutality, whatever you want to call them, bad shootings, questionable shootings. But it all came down to a he said, she said between witnesses. And police officers here in the Houston area were routinely no-billed for any sort of police shooting. But all of that has changed, it seems, with the ubiquity of cameras. There are so many cameras out there that captured this. If it had not been for the camera being there, we probably would have heard a few things about this, but we wouldn't be talking about the video. We'd have a he said, she said. Has the ubiquity of cameras changed that relationship between law enforcement and the communities there to serve and protect?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, think about all the various abuses by the police, because this is not new. It has always happened. And you can imagine the 1940s and 50s and 60s and 70s when this was happening in the streets and people being shot by the police and on and on. And these things essentially, people believed the law enforcement agents, and that was the end of it. But since the 1990s, when cameras began to show up, and then later telephones began to show up with cameras, and now there's all kinds of evidence. It allows citizens and public opinion, you and me, to be able to look at different videos that circulate in the internet from different angles. There's a lot of people, you can see a lot of people around with their phones up in the air taking video, and clearly you can make your own judgment. And now all that is evidence that can play against law enforcement. Of course, the police forces try to protect themselves. Certainly after the 1990s, you remember Mr. Rodney King in Los Angeles. You remember George Floyd up in Minnesota, and there was a lot of video evidence going around, and that was essentially in the court of public opinion. Now it's even more so. Law enforcement agencies have tried to protect themselves by establishing protocols, distance, by establishing, and even there was a big debate at some point that I remember about the agents themselves having their own cameras on their chests so that they could capture the moment and the interaction. That's
Right.
still the case. Now cameras are also mounted on the patrol cars. They're everywhere. And I think that sort of behooves the law enforcement agents, certainly ICE, to be a lot more cautious, and of course, try to figure out how to de-escalate a situation like that. I
Right.
mean, that was
Yeah.
clearly a very big issue there.
You know,
Yes.
it is interesting. A few years ago, when Houston City Council was debating whether they should fund body cams for Houston police officers, I telephoned over to a police supply store, told me, come on over, take a look. Cops are here buying these things. A lot of police officers want body cams. Tony, we have a call on the line. Jay from Pearland. Jay, you're on the radio. What's on your mind?
Yes, good morning, guys. I work for Homeland Security, so as an officer, I'll tell you guys, I'm going to give you guys two perspectives. One thing is, yes, a vehicle can be used as a weapon. Number two, a lot of times we have to utilize common sense. I mean, be honest with you, I worked the Mexican border many times. You know how many times idiots has tried to run me over with a vehicle? And a lot of times you have to think about the situation you're in. And you're like, you know what? I'm working around a lot of fools, a lot of idiots. it's going to be a dangerous situation. You just have to kind of like move away.
So what was your impression? You're in law enforcement. When you saw this video, what did you think? You still there, Jay?
Look, yeah, I'm here. That whole situation, and I can actually go out there and work with those guys. But anyway, it's just it's a crappy situation to be in.
Mm-hmm.
It's a crappy situation to be in. They got protesters out there. You know, people are going to be ramming you with cars. I mean,
it's a tough position to be in. But as you look at that video,
I mean, you want to go home at the end of the day to your family, correct?
Yes.
Right,
You want
right.
somebody to run you over, kill you guys, or anything
Right.
like that. You as a person, you have to think of yourself. Am I going to just try to hustle my ass, to the side and let this lady go about her business, or am I going to shoot? I mean, it's your call. It's your training. It's your experiences. It's everything comes into play.
So Jay, let me ask you a hard question. What do you think you would have done in that situation?
I've been in that situation, I would have scooted my ass to the side as quick as I can.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Thank you, Jay from Pearland. And thank you, Tony Payan, who is the executive director of the Claudio X Gonzalez Center for the U.S. and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Thank you, Tony, for joining us today on Hello Houston.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you, guys. Until next time.